And I know you've talked about anxiety, and whenever you've spoken on it, it's really helped my perspective a lot. Maybe speak to this idea, because I wonder if people are struggling with that as well right now, just being cooped up, locked in, locked at home, no job, stuff like that. What's the process of healing, or where does it start with anxiety? Because as you've mentioned before, God does not come down and like sprinkle fairy dust over us and just poof, anxiety goes away, lust, pride. It's this process. What's the first step or two in that process of anxiety or anything that people are struggling with mentally?
Yeah. Well, anxiety comes from different things, and not everybody's anxiety is the same. In fact, it's so different. I was talking to a friend who had a traumatic event in a relationship recently. Talking to this friend, and this friend he began to have really bad anxiety after a relational fallout. And then as the relationship was repaired, his anxiety and all of these symptoms just kind of disappeared. And so it's so weird how there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's a brilliant book about how your body essentially absorbs traumatic experiences, and it explains how you can heal from these things. So losing a job, losing a home, losing a car, through COVID-19, that can be a traumatic experience, and it can begin to manifest itself in a variety of different ways. What's going to happen in the future? Are we ever going to be able to see the light of day again? Will I ever get a suntan? Will I ever see my friends? Are we all going to die? Is China going to nuke us? Do we need to nuke them? Just all this stuff that's going on, especially, with, take the headlines right now with these two black men being, murdered recently, and that is 100% going to cause PTSD and trauma to black people in America and the world. So there's a lot going on, and the healing process looks. I guess it looks sort of different for everybody, but sort of similar for everybody. And I think that the healing process is essentially that the first thing you do is you yield to the Lord. It's the first thing you do, and you just go, Lord, I don't feel good right now. I don't feel myself right now. I'm not even thinking the right thoughts. But I can't think this way out. But God, I just want you to know that I'm putting my trust in you. So, if I die, I think that, thinking of the worst case scenario and just begin there. Lord, if I die, that's the worst thing that happens, because that's obviously the worst thing that can happen. I'm with Jesus. I'm healed. I'm in eternity. Etc.
Right.
But then there's beyond that, there's obviously practical things that can begin the healing. But because ultimately, I think anxiety is fear of future pain, and so if you believe that the Lord is going to be good to you and that His providence, His circle of providence, is unique to you because you are a follower of Jesus Christ, and that He thinks about you different and He behaves toward you different than He thinks and behaves towards others, which I believe is true, then you should, that needs to sink in at some soul level. But practicing somebody just wrote, therapy is very effective. I went and saw a psychologist for a year and just learned cognitive behavioral therapy and learned to be in my body and things. And radical acceptance is one that is that it's a strategy. You just radically accept your situation.
What does that look like?
Well, it's like a deer being caught in barbed wire, and the more that it struggles, the more that it's going to cut itself, and the more it's going to freak out. Most of our PTSD is the result of panic. It's the result of being whipped up into a frenzy. And the longer that you are whipped up into that frenzy, the longer that you're panicking, the more damage you do to areas in your brain actually that control your flight or fight mechanism, etc. Pumps cortisol into your body, all that type of stuff. But if you can learn ways to, it's called radical acceptance, is what it's called, and you stop struggling. So I find that I hold my tension in my neck, and so all throughout the day, like even during this conversation, I relaxed my shoulders. I brought my shoulders down because um, that's where I hold it, and when so you find ways to continually um, change the channel, get into your body, go for walks, do physical exercises. Don't try to think your way out of things, um, and just be more present, if that makes sense. But cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm like kind of like brushing over it, but it's like it changed my life. And I still practice these things. I still practice radical acceptance. I still practice regularly shrugging my shoulders down. I still practice when I'm feeling out of control to just relax, not fight it. I'm not going to fight the feeling of out of control. I'm not going to fight the feeling of panic. I'm not going to fight the feeling of being helpless. Um, but I'm going to respond, with radical acceptance, etc. So there are kind of tips, and any psychologist will obviously diagnose you differently. So I highly recommend people who are struggling with depression, anxiety, trauma right now from whatever's happened in their life, to seek out a psychologist. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It just means that you're a normal person and you're holding some trauma, and begin to learn. I did this all drug free. I've never been on a drug before, and there's no judgment to anybody who's ever been to psychiatrist and taken, drugs for depression or whatever. But I think that there are tips that we can learn from psychologists that kind of guide us that way.